Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is Thursday, May 15th. This is the eve of the MLB's Rivalry Series Weekend. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm really looking forward to this. I like this concept. It makes me think of the old days, even with the two teams in the cities and getting a chance to play each other. The series actually started. Um, the weekend actually started today with the Astros and the Rangers playing. Uh, and if that's any indication of what's going to be taking place this weekend, that was a really good game. The Rangers won 1-0. Jacob DeGrom and Hunter Brown for the Rangers and the Astros, respectively, threw a wonderful 8 innings each in a game that ended 1-0 on a Jake Berger home run, I think in the sixth or the seventh inning. So hopefully that's harbinger of things to come for the weekend. So let's look at these series. The first one's going to start tomorrow at excuse me at I guess it's 2:10 in excuse me. I'm not going to cut this. 2:10 in Chicago is the White Sox will be at Wrigley Field to play the Cubs. They're dubbing this the Crosstown Classic. Of course, both teams are in different leagues, in the American League and the National League, of course. So the first time these teams ever met in a regular season game was um, in June of 1997. You'll see, I got to take a drink here. You'll see that there's a few, um, as we go through this, a few 1997s. If memory serves me correctly, that was the beginning of interleague play way back when. It doesn't seem that long ago, but I guess it was. But anyways, it'll be the Cubs and the White Sox at Wrigley. Those two teams, their parks are 9 miles apart, and that's part of the allure for me is these teams. And I think back even before that, when in New York, when you see pictures of Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds, and I just think those matchups are kind of neat. And in those days they didn't happen because teams were in opposite leagues and they didn't meet each other during the regular season. Now, the White Sox and the Cubs, they've met before in one World Series, the 1906 World Series, and the White Sox won that one. So the teams are on different planes right now as the Cubs are beginning to assert themselves as a very good team in the league, and the White Sox are a team that is they're not yet up and coming. They're happy with their starting pitching staff for the most part, and some of their players, but they're still young and they're still a long ways away from being a contender. But it's a the Battle of Chicago, the Crosstown Classic, so that'll be fun. Next on the list is the Cleveland Guardians and the Cincinnati Reds, and they're playing for the Ohio Cup. Again, they played the first time, again separate leagues, and the Guardians from the American League, the Reds from the National League. They didn't meet in the regular season till 1997 as well. They've never met in a World Series. They both had their times at the top. I mean, the, you always remember the Big Red Machine in Cincinnati, and the and other times, and of course in Cleveland they had some over the years. They not for long periods of time, but they've had some good teams, but they've never met in the World Series. So the Ohio Cup. The next one is Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. They didn't have the MLB didn't give a name to this. I kind of thought that was weird, so I gave them one. I'm calling it the Keystone Series. Pennsylvania is the Keystone State, so why not? Now, the first time these two teams met, the oldest rivalry of these 15 rivalries They met in May of 1887 for the first time. Of course, they're two National League teams. Something else that I found interesting, they have never met in the playoffs. And of course, they can't meet in the World Series, being in the same league, but they have never met in the playoffs. And I can remember when the Expos were a decent team, and to me the Pirates and the Phillies were the teams that were always ahead of them. But in those days, there wasn't as many teams, and even if there was two teams, they would cross over the East and the West, so they would never meet, both being in the Eastern Division at that time. Now those parks, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, they're 309 miles apart. Those parks, so it's not like a city rivalry, but still a state rivalry. The next series is the Beltway series, and I was going to look that up, what the Beltway was, but I'm assuming it's kind of a freeway or something similar to that. Um, those parks are 40 miles apart, the Nationals and the Orioles. They met for the first time in the regular season in May 2006. And what I'm thinking about that is prior to that, the Nationals were the Montreal Expos, so that's a different thing, right? The Orioles and the Expos may have met. I don't know, but this is now the Nationals, the reincarnated Expos. Being in different leagues, they could have met in a World Series, but the Orioles have been in a number of them since I've been watching baseball anyway. But the Nationals have been in one, and it wasn't against the Orioles in 2019, and the Expos never were in a World Series. And this is the one I think about, the next one on the list, the Mets and the Yankees, the Subway Series. That to me is that's the one that I think about when I think about city rivalries or state rivalries, and even back in the early days when Brooklyn was still in New York and the Giants were still in New York and the Yankees before the Mets. So there was three teams there. It was, of course, you would always have the Giants and the Dodgers playing each other, but the Yankees were in the American League, so that didn't happen. And they played a lot against the Yankees. Played a lot against the Giants and the Dodgers in the World Series when those teams were there. But these two teams, the Mets and the Yankees, have met once in the World Series, and that was in 2000, with the Yankees winning that. The first time they ever played in a regular season game was in, again, June 1997, where most of these teams met for the first time. And the listing for these two, how far apart are these two parks? 14 miles by subway. So it truly is a Subway Series. That was the mileage that I found. The next on the list is the Detroit Tigers and the Toronto Blue Jays. This is in Toronto. Um, they met for the first time in 1977. Of course, they're both in the American League, and that is, I'm sure, the first time that this was the Blue Jays' first season, 1977. So that would have been their first meeting. Those parks are 230 miles apart. Major League Baseball didn't come up with a name for this series either, but I call it the Great Lakes Series. Detroit's on Lake Erie and Toronto's on Lake Ontario, so why not? Now the next series, and then this is one that I really like this matchup: the Braves and the Red Sox, and that's because, of course, at one time the Braves, before they were in Atlanta, they were in Milwaukee, but before they were in Milwaukee, they were in Boston. Boston was a two-team town at that time, and so these guys met. Well, they didn't meet because they were in the Braves, of course, are in the National League, and the Red Sox in the American League. But again, Major League Baseball didn't name this, so I'm calling it the Hometown Cup, and because the Braves are coming back to their hometown, trying to win the cup from the still in Boston Red Sox. First time these two teams met in the regular season was in 1997 as well. Now, currently, these two teams, their ballparks are 1,070 miles apart, but had the Braves still been in Boston, their parks were actually about 2 miles apart. They, it is now called Nickerson Field. It was Braves Field or Braves Stadium or something like that, and now it has been taken over by I can't remember the name of the university, but Nickerson Field, anyways. And the parks, and there's still a sports complex in that area where the Braves Field was, and 2 miles away from Fenway. In fact, Braves Field was bigger than Fenway, and there was times that the Red Sox would use Braves Field for a couple World Series. I can't remember which ones, but very many years ago, over 100 years ago, they played their games there rather than at Fenway. The next series, the Rays and the Marlins. They're calling this a citrus series. Why not? It's in Florida. Florida famous for oranges, certainly citrus fruit. So they are, and that's again a good series, a state rivalry series, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. These two teams met for the first time in June 1998. Of course, they are both in separate leagues, the Rays in the American League and the Marlins in the National League. Their parks are now Steinbrenner Field, where the Rays are playing, and the park I can't think of the corporate name for the Miami park, but they're 280 miles apart. So that that's a bit of a drive, but it's an interstate rivalry. The next one is they're calling it the I-70 series. I thought there could have been a better name for that. That's the St. Louis Cardinals and the Kansas City Royals, both teams in Missouri, the Show Me State. So I think it should be called the Show Me Cup. These teams met for the first time in 1997. The parks are 240 miles apart, and they've actually met in a World Series. These two teams, with in 1985, with the Royals coming out on top in that one. I, I want to say that could have been the first, maybe the first World Series played entirely on AstroTurf. I'd have to check that, and I certainly wouldn't put any money on that, but it very well could have been. The next series, the Silver Boot Series, is in Texas. The two Texas teams, the Astros and the Rangers, and as I said, it got off to a great start today with a 1-0 win for the Rangers. Um, these teams met for the first time in June 2001 in a regular season game, and I'm trying to think about like why would it have been so late? Now, and maybe at the time, for some reason, they were the Astros were in the National League. I can't remember when they changed over to the American League, but maybe that had something to do with it because that's later than all the rest of these for the most part. Nevertheless, they play each other all the time now. I think they play actually 3 different series this year, or maybe even 4 different series this season. They're part of the same division in the American League, the Western Division. And their parks are 230 miles apart. They would have had a chance maybe of playing in a World Series against each other, but they didn't. Now they can't because they're both in the American League. The next one, Minnesota Twins and the Milwaukee Brewers. Um, MLB didn't give a name for this series either, so I made one, the Northwoods Challenge, and I called it that because a lot of I don't know if you may be familiar with the Northwoods League in collegiate summer baseball, one of the best summer baseball leagues in the country. or in North America. So I've called it that, the Northwoods Challenge. A lot of teams from Minnesota and Wisconsin. Those teams met for the first time in May of 1970. And that would have been when they were both in the American League. The Brewers, that would have been their first season um, in Milwaukee. Of course, in 1969, with the first, or not the first expansion, but the expansion for each league going to 12 teams. The Brewers started out as the Seattle Pilots, lasted there for 1 year, left in trailers, I think, or actually, I think they started spring training as going to Seattle. By the end of spring training, they were going to be playing in Milwaukee. I think they even were wearing Seattle uniforms for throughout spring training and maybe even for the start of the regular season. I can't remember, but this would have been the first time they met. Of course, now the Brewers are in the National League and they can now meet in a World Series, although they haven't. And there's a possibility they could in the near future, I suppose. Now, the next series, Colorado Rockies and the Arizona Diamondbacks. They called this the Rocky Mountain Showdown, and I like that. I really do. I just think that those two teams are in the Rocky Mountain states. I think there's going to be more in a while. I wouldn't be surprised to. Well, of course, oh, the Athletics are going to Las Vegas at some point, maybe. We'll see about that, I suppose, still. And I really think that another, I think that if there is a further expansion, and baseball goes to 32 teams, that there will be a team in Salt Lake City. So there would be 4 teams in those Rocky Mountain states. And wouldn't that be interesting to see that? This will be I don't know. Well, it won't be a good series. I think the Diamondbacks should win that handily. Those teams met for the first time in 1998. Of course, they're both expansion teams, so once they both got in, they weren't around. Both of them weren't around in '97. Those parks are 590 miles apart, and of course, they'll never meet in a World Series, or at least not now, the way things stand, as they are both in the National League West. The next series, the Seattle Mariners and the San Diego Padres, playing for the Vetter Cup. And I guess I don't pay enough attention. The Vetter Cup is named after Eddie Vedder, the frontman for Pearl Jam. Yeah, I like Pearl Jam. Vedder was born in San Diego and moved to Seattle and became part of the music scene there. And Pearl Jam was formed there, so that's kind of what it's become. And I think it's an organic thing. It's not a made up thing. It's something that happened on its own, and so that's kind of interesting that it came about that way. The only thing about that is that Eddie Vedder is a Cubs fan. Go figure. Um, these teams met for the first time in July 1997, like a lot of the other ones did. Um, and those parks are 1,065 miles apart. It's funny, that is one of the least rivalry-ish type of series that we've of all of these series. Yet I kind of like the connection, and so it's interesting. Yeah. The next one, the Freeway Series, the Angels and the Dodgers. Those parks 28 miles apart, and they've never met in a World Series. They could have had chances to, I suppose, over the years. You'd have to look back and see if they were actually in the playoffs at the same time and all that kind of stuff. But I think there was a possibility, I guess, and wouldn't that have been something? Those two teams played in a World Series. Their first regular season game, was again 1997, like so many of these others. Um, and the final series, the Athletics, we'll call them the Athletics, and the San Francisco Giants. This was formerly the Bay Bridge Series. They've got no name for it, and I'm not prepared to give it a name. I'd just as soon rub that formerly out, and it's become the Bay Bridge Series again. They met for the first time in 1997, just like all the rest. But they have both these teams have a storied history. They both come from other places. The Athletics were in Philadelphia, then Kansas City, and then Oakland. While they were in Philadelphia and the Giants were in New York, they actually met in 3 World Series, with the Giants winning the first one in 1905, the Athletics winning the next 2 in 1911 and 1913. And then, excuse me, when both teams had made their moves in 1989, the Athletics defeated the Oakland Athletics defeated the San Francisco Giants in the 1989 World Series, which, if you remember, was there was an earthquake at the start of that series. Took a few days and they got it going again, but wasn't that was quite a thing, that earthquake. Their parks currently with the Athletics in West Sacramento are 75 miles apart. When they were in Oakland, their parks were 11 miles apart. So that's it for all those series. I just want to mention a little bit more about these 4 series here. These are, of course, the 4 most westerly teams, the 6 West Coast teams, Pacific Coast teams, and then the 2 Rocky Mountain teams. And I remember this happening. I don't know if it was the same matchups, but these 8 teams were playing amongst each other for a series. I'm going to say it's 4 years ago, and I just thought it made me think about the Pacific Coast League. I don't know why, but it just did. But of course, all of these teams here have roots in there is great history of the Pacific Coast League in these cities. The Mariners, there was the Seattle Rainiers, the San Diego Padres, the Los Angeles Angels, the Hollywood Stars, we'll let the Dodgers be them, the Oakland Oaks, and the San Francisco Seals. The other teams in the league were the Sacramento Solons and the Portland Beavers, and I let these 2 teams be that. So I can remember watching it on my screen here, watching MLB TV, and of course you can have all 4 games going on, and I had all 4 of those games, and I just thought this is almost like a modern version of maybe sometime in the late 40s, early 50s, where a kid in let's say somewhere in Northern California would maybe get all the radio stations and listen to all of these Pacific Coast League teams before before MLB in the Dodgers and the Giants came, and kind of was the end of the Pacific Coast League as it was known then. Um, but anyway, that's what I thought about that, and I'm going to do that again here tomorrow night. I'm going to sit down and put all 4 of those games on, and I'm going to turn the lights off and just sit and watch and just think about how things were. Anyway, your thoughts on this series, if you like this concept of these series, these rivalry series, and if there's a better way to maybe do it, who knows? Just put that in the comments down below if you got any thoughts on it. And if you haven't done so already, please hit like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate your support. I will talk to you again soon.